Just 22 miles from Los Angeles, across the Catalina Channel, the city of Avalon beckons thousands of visitors from around the world each year. The island's population peaks in the summer months, and for those privileged few who can call Avalon home, these months are filled with crowds ready to enjoy this island's life. But some who live on this Channel Island oasis are in grave danger. Extinction looms for one of the island's oldest residents, the Catalina island fox. No one really knows how long they have been on the island, or how they made the crossing perhaps 5,000 years ago. But one thing is known for certainty, that the native population, the first humans to reside on Santa Catalina Island, consider the Catalina island fox special. And even today, deep in the island's interior, faint petroglyph outlines depicting the fox are still visible. In a place saved from a typical urban landscape, this unique island is where visitors and residents alike can share sights of a world seemingly frozen in time, unchanged in a myriad of ways. Common sights seem to take on uncommon beauty. In those centuries past, the Santa Catalina island fox once roamed the island in large, uncounted numbers. With no natural predators, the Catalina island fox ruled from the rugged interior canyons to the sea. Today, fewer than 200 struggle to survive. For thousands of years, the wild island fox lived in harmony with its human island companions. Now, all that has changed. The very future of the island fox depends on the efforts of the Santa Catalina Island Conservancy. Santa Catalina Island Conservancy President, Rose Ellen Gardner.
Hello, I'm Rose Ellen Gardner, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Catalina Island Conservancy. The Conservancy was the dream of the Wrigley family members. The members of the Wrigley family essentially owned all of Santa Catalina Island beginning in 1919. Through the years, they became aware of what a valuable and special place that Catalina Island is. They wanted to make sure that the island was preserved and restored in a natural state for future generations to enjoy much in the way that they did. So in the early 70s, Philip Wrigley began looking for ways to accomplish this, and in 1972 incorporated the Catalina Island Conservancy as a nonprofit organization. In 1975, members of the Wrigley family gave 88% of the island to the Conservancy. The mission of the Conservancy is to restore, preserve, and protect the land that it owns in perpetuity. And today, the Conservancy is actively restoring and preserving the property, including the plants and animals. As soon as the Conservancy's board of directors became aware of the crash in the fox population, they immediately unanimously voted to make the Fox Project the #1 priority for the Conservancy. It's our responsibility to make sure that the population remains healthy, and we're doing everything that we can to see that that happens.
To implement a recovery plan, the Conservancy contracted with conservation experts, the Institute for Wildlife Studies.
My name is David Garcelon. I'm the president of the Institute for Wildlife Studies. We're a nonprofit wildlife research and conservation organization headquartered in Arcata, California. The Institute is here to assist the Santa Catalina Island Conservancy in their restoration program of the island fox. The island fox suffered a rather huge decline a few years ago due to the introduction of a canine disease called canine distemper.
Veterinarian Steve Tim.
In 1998, we had a very healthy population of foxes. It was apparent that the numbers were up throughout the island. It was very easy to see wild foxes on the roadsides. By spring of 1999, reports from field biologists, Conservancy personnel, and just the general public indicated that they were difficult to find. We had a high suspicion of canine distemper virus, and finding a couple of foxes beside the road that had recently died. The laboratory evaluation of the lung tissue revealed that it had the classic signs of canine distemper virus infection, and those tissues were again sent out to Cornell Laboratories in New York and positively identified it as canine distemper virus. Early in this program, we went back to the hay press area, set out a number of traps, and got very lucky to trap a single fox. She was given a physical exam. We took some blood and sent it to a lab to have it analyzed for potential diseases that she may have been exposed to. And specifically, it did come back with a serotiter, or evidence of exposure, to canine distemper virus. With all our information that we had gathered, we committed ourselves to investigating an epidemic of canine distemper virus on Catalina Island that appears to have occurred somewhere between summer of '98 and pretty much ran its course through summer of '99.
Apparently at some time a dog came on the island that had this canine distemper virus, and it was transmitted to the wild island foxes. And unfortunately, island foxes don't have any natural immunity to this disease, and it spread through their population very quickly, and there's a very high mortality rate. So unfortunately, in a very short period of time, within the course of a year, we probably lost 95% of the foxes on the eastern 80% of the island. And we're rather lucky in one sense that the island has sort of a natural barrier or constriction towards the western end. And for some reason, one of the diseased foxes didn't cross over that isthmus at Two Harbors, and so the disease didn't spread from the eastern 80% of the island to the remaining area at the west end. So we're very lucky in the sense that we still have a fairly healthy population of foxes at the west end of the island. Some recent trapping efforts, John and Bill, our field crew, indicated we have at least 150 individuals at the west end of the island at this time.
John and I work so well with each other. We're always one step ahead of each other in our thought process, and it makes everything go so smooth.
I think we both have different traits. I had a lot of trapping background, and Bill had background in threatened and endangered wildlife, and that helps us out.
And we keep updating and coming up with better ideas. And our goal is to minimize the contact with these animals. Here we are setting a trap. This is a good location for us. We catch a lot of foxes here. Lately we've been catching a lot of juveniles. Once we put the bait in it, we line it, the front end, with some grass to cover up the wire and to kind of cover up the trap plate, just so that when they step in it, they're not automatically stepping on a wire, which is not natural to them. So when we line it with grass, it's more natural, and plus if we do catch one, it gives them something to bed down until we come back and check it. Seems like recently we've been catching a lot of young foxes here, so this might be an area, territory that hasn't been established yet. That might be a reason why we're catching a lot of juveniles, because they're trying to establish a territory. So that's another reason why we like to set it up here.
I think we've had 4 different juvenile foxes that we've caught at the same site, so this set should work.
Some of the strategies we're looking at for conserving the island fox on Santa Catalina Island include, one is vaccinating the remaining population against canine distemper. The vaccine that we used for this program is actually experimental. It's a special vaccine that can be used for animals that are very sensitive to canine distemper. If you were to use the vaccine that are typically given to a domestic dog to try to help the island fox, they would actually develop the disease from the vaccine. It has a little bit of the live virus in it, and so when you give those to island foxes or other very sensitive animals, they can actually come down with the disease. We didn't want to try this new vaccine essentially across the entire population and say, hey, looks good, take it out and start using it. We really wanted to make sure there weren't going to be any secondary problems or effects with the vaccine. So we brought in 6 foxes out of the wild, 3 females and 3 males, and we isolated them both from each other and from any interaction from outside foxes or dogs or anything like that. And we gave them this vaccine and then monitored them over the course of several months to see whether first they developed the antibodies, and secondly whether or not there'd be any potential secondary effects from having this. And what we found is that the foxes did in fact develop antibodies against canine distemper, and there were no secondary effects. At that point, the California Department of Fish and Game granted us a permit to be able to use this vaccine on the wild population. And that way, if there is an outbreak in the future, we get another dog on the island with canine distemper, then there's a greater opportunity that more of the foxes will actually survive that outbreak of the disease because they have some antibody in their system now that we provided them with the vaccine. Another technique or strategy that we're using to try to conserve the foxes out here is to translocate juveniles from the west end of the island, where the foxes are still doing well, onto the eastern portion of the island where they have suffered the greatest decline. And the idea of using juvenile foxes rather than adults is the juveniles at that point in their life are just starting to try to find their own home range, a home of their own, find a mate and all that, and that's the time we want to move them to the new area.
We know there's 160 individuals, and they definitely have their own personalities.
Definitely. We know which ones are more aggressive when we walk up to a trap and we identify them. We know this female is going to be a little more aggressive. We have to handle her a little different. And once we get them out of the trap, it's almost as if we're not working with a wild animal.
I've done some work with canines and lots of other wild critters, and I was amazed at how docile they are.
I think the project we're working on is exceptionally important, working with these threatened animals. We're going to bring her over to the release site on the eastern end near the airport, let her go, and hopefully she'll establish a new territory there. We did extensive telemetry on the first 6 that we released, and we're happy to find out that they are staying over there, which doesn't surprise us because there's no competitors there because the population's decimated. And John and I do telemetry on her as well as the other ones, so they should do good. And then hopefully they'll breed over there and we'll help that population.
It'd be nice next year to find 2 or 3 pups in her den.
Yeah.
That's the main goal.
Through the educational efforts of the Conservancy, the community and the Conservancy staff are informed as to the current status of the Fox Project. Education Director Deb Jensen.
In 1999, when it was discovered that the fox population was in decline due to canine distemper virus, we started to develop programs in the education department that would let people know what their role might be in protecting the fox and ultimately all of its habitat here on Catalina Island. Essentially, what we said was pay attention to how you drive and think about how you're interacting with wildlife. Make sure your animals are on leash and vaccinated. But the other part of the programs we began to develop were with school children. And our 5th grade program, for instance, is entirely focused on the fox as a potential endangered species.
My name is Jeff Chapman, and I'm an education assistant with the Catalina Island Conservancy. I get to work with the kids that live here on Santa Catalina Island. And these kids come out here and they love this island. From the time of their birth, they have the island's outline ingrained in their mind.
The students have a great affinity for this animal and for understanding all of the species that live here on the island with them, their neighbors, so to speak.
And we come out here with these children and we teach them about things like the foxes, about the ground squirrels, about the shieldback katydids, and they are filled with wonder.
I made a decision a long time ago, a lot of years ago, that rather than being a scientist in the field, my great joy in life is to work with people, and specifically with children. It's joyful. It's just joyful to be out with children and to see their enthusiasm for learning what's going on. You can almost see the light bulbs going off when they realize that in nature it is all one great interconnected web of relationships, and that of course is the main point. I hope that working together we're going to bring the fox back, restore the population, so that the kidlets that we're working with now that go to Avalon School will be able to enjoy this animal with their little ones when they're in the interior 20-25 years from now.
It's a really great experience to actually see a fox out here in the wild. It'd be very sad to see them go.
It really makes me excited that in the future, these are the future residents of Santa Catalina Island, and that they will be able to make wise decisions regarding this land when I'm long gone.
The long-term success of the Fox Restoration Project depends to a great extent on the captive breeding facility. Located in a remote section of the island, this facility did not exist a year ago, but now, in fact, acts not only as a center for captive breeding, but also the home to nearly a dozen pair of island foxes.
Here at our captive breeding site, we've constructed 12 breeding pens. These 12 cages, we are hopeful, will produce a number of foxes that can be then released into the wild each year to augment those that we're translocating from the West End. First pair that we brought up to place in here from the vaccination trial pens were a male and a female we brought in on Valentine's Day, and we thought that was appropriate to put them together then. And they were sort of a test of the pen. We wanted to make sure that, see how they behaved in there before we brought in our other wild foxes. And they actually did very well together. There was never any aggression between the two. And apparently they liked each other well enough to go ahead and start a little family. Our goal was to try to provide some of the natural components that they have in the wild and enough area that they can run around in. And it's certainly not going to be the same as being free. But I think with these 12 pens that are 30 feet wide and 100 feet long, they have an enclosed portion where the foxes can get out of the weather if they'd like. We have den boxes that we've created that we're hoping simulate what they would use in the wild. With the natural vegetation that we try to keep in the cages, and I think it's something that is going to make the time in captivity something that's not going to be a real problem for the island foxes. It was a little bit of a surprise to us to find that some of the foxes that we had brought in from the vaccination program had actually become pregnant. And sure enough, within a month after the foxes were placed together in the cage, the female had apparently become pregnant, and it was a bit of a surprise when we captured one of them and saw that she was about to give birth.
Only a few hours old and weighing just ounces, these are the first Catalina Island pups born in captivity and seeing their new surroundings for the first time. The foxes soon go from the den box to explore the outside world.
we were hoping that the foxes would not only produce youngsters in captivity, but we would have a big enough area where the young animals would have a chance to learn some of the things that they need to learn before they're released into the wild. They have rock piles and cactus plants to have to dodge, and they can learn some of the things they're going to need to learn out in the wild. We can also introduce the type of prey items they would normally be feeding on in the wild so that their parents can teach them some of the things they need to know to survive. And then when they reach adult weight and at a time when they would be leaving their parents and starting to investigate new habitats, taking little road trips, day trips away from their parents' territory, that's the time when we would probably think about putting radio collars on them and releasing them back into the wild here on Catalina.
After months of evaluation and loving care, the day of release for the young captive bred foxes arrives.
I think when the day finally comes when we actually release these captive bred, captive reared foxes and they're going out in the wild, it's going to be a pretty exciting time, because that's sort of the high point of the whole thing, to have these foxes that you spend all this time producing, their adult weight, they're preying on things in captivity and doing well, taking them out and saying, okay, now how do they do in the big new world out there? And there'll be some very intense follow-up, because this is one of the first times this has ever been done. It's sort of cutting edge, so we're going to want to see how well these pups do that have been captive reared and released in the wild compared to those that we brought in as wild juveniles and translocated. It's going to be I think it's going to be a pretty exciting time. I think that's going to be a time where we're all going to be pretty much having some sleepless nights watching to see what happens, because it's kind of like letting your kids go out for the first time. You know, you're pretty nervous and they're on their own and there's nothing you can do to protect them. But I'm confident that the foxes can do well. They're very much generalists. They eat insects and fruits and small mammals, and there's almost not any place they can't go to find a meal. And we're going to be keeping very close tabs on them.
I'm very proud of what we've done. When we release the foxes, the pups from the captive breeding, is going to be a good day and a step in the right direction.
That'll be a happy day. So I've got mixed feelings. I've got the feelings that here go my children, but with the concerns that I hope we did things right and they'll be healthy and survive.
The island fox, it doesn't belong to the Conservancy, it doesn't belong to the state of California, but it belongs to everyone. The Catalina Island Conservancy is funding this entire effort, and it's something that's really to be congratulated for. They didn't waste any time at all. It was just, what can we do to turn this around to see the fox return to the island again?
There's no way vast amounts of scientific research can ever protect this island or any special place. This island and the special places are going to be protected by people like me and you who care about it and protect the habitats that we all need to survive.
We're hoping to see the fox numbers increase. And we're also hoping to see island residents and visitors knowing about the fox and working with us to help protect the fox.
As the young foxes start their new lives back to the island that all their past generations have called home, their future still remains uncertain. Like all threatened species, only time and the commitment of those who care will determine the final outcome. The Santa Catalina Island Conservancy and its partners have taken the first critical steps on the road to restoration and recovery of a priceless treasure, the Catalina Island fox.